In this video, I'm going to show you a different and hopefully new way of editing black and white images inside of Lightroom Classic to go from this to this final image. Let's dive in. My name is Pi, and I'm one of the founders of Lynn and Jersa Photography and SLRLounge.com. We're teaming up with Adorama to bring you a new series of photography tutorials called Master Your Craft right here on Adorama TV. So let's dive in. Hello, my friends. My name is Pi. Welcome to Adorama TV. It's wonderful being back here with y'all. So this is a great time. Go ahead and pause the video, download the exercise file, load it into Lightroom, and then go ahead and click play again. Or you can load up any image you'd like of your own. Ideally, I would recommend doing this with a raw file. Now let me show you what we're going to be doing, and then I'm going to break it down into a series of steps that don't waste your time, because we know your time is valuable. My time is valuable. All of our time is valuable. So look, if I reset this image out, this is the exercise file, by the way, and if I press V, you'll get the standard black and white conversion, right? Okay, so let's go to the next image. Now what I've done here is I did the standard black and white conversion, and then I kind of, well, adjusted the highlights down, adjusted the shadows, kind of added blacks, and kind of added contrast, and we get to this. This is sort of a typical black and white that we might edit inside of Lightroom, and it looks better than the standard conversion. But this is actually where we're going to go with the edit, and what I'm about to show you can be applied to any image, and I think you're going to like it quite a bit. So let's go ahead and dive in right from the beginning. I'm actually going to take this image. We're in the develop module. I have the entire image reset out. Let's start with step number one. You're going to leave the image actually in color, and what I want you to do is to separate the colors. Okay, so we're going to use temperature to basically dial up and down to get to a place where we can actually see different colors in the image. This works incredibly well on all images, but you'll find this step very important on images like this one, where there's not a ton of color in the scene to begin with. So if I raise this up, you'll notice that everything takes on kind of a yellow hue to it. If I lower to a lower color temperature, we start getting to a place where I can actually see blues and some of the yellows. Okay, so right here about 5000 Kelvin is where we're going to leave this. I leave this in color right now because if I flip it to black and white, I'm not going to be able to see those changes that well, right? So we're going to leave it in color. Then step two, we're going to go down to calibration, and I'm actually going to use the saturation to kind of exaggerate that color. We can also actually play with the channels. So if you actually want to touch the channels a bit, you can kind of increase reds to add a little bit more blues to it. We can increase saturation on the green side and then start tweaking the green hues to get a little bit more into it. And same thing on the blue. So usually I like to touch the saturation first, and then I start tweaking the values. Okay, and I'm going to leave the blues kind of centered up. Now what we're doing in these first two steps is separating and then kind of exaggerating the colors. If you're asking why, it's because when we flip this into black and white and we go to the black and white mixer, we can now have direct control over these tones here. If the entire image was yellow, then really the only thing that's going to make a change to the image is just the yellow slider. So we're separating out the colors and exaggerating them so that we have more flexibility when it comes to the black and white mixer. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do this. We're going to go to step three. We're going to switch this to black and white by pressing V. And now I'm going to lower the exposure. Okay, so I'm going to lower to somewhere like around here. And then we're going to go to step four, where you're going to use the basic panel to kind of reveal areas of the image that you want to essentially reveal, right? And you can go anywhere in the exposure that you'd like, but I like taking it down to around -1 to like -2, somewhere in that range. What I'm going to do now is use my highlights to kind of control a bit of the sky. I'm going to bring a bit more white point in, and sometimes I like doing this first. I like going white point first and then doing the highlights, so that if you want, you can actually even control some of the extreme whites with the highlight slider. But we're going to go ahead and just raise it up a bit on this side. Now I'm going to add a little bit more detail in the shadow, and you can see how high you can go. I don't want this to appear like an HDR image. I want it to still have good contrast, so I'm going to go up to about there. And then I'm going to lift the blacks maybe a little. I mean, this kind of looks good both ways. So here, there's not really a right or wrong to this. I want you guys to do this piece of the edit to your own taste. So this is where I'm going to leave it, okay? You can also tweak presence and stuff like that, but we're going to actually get back to that in just a moment. So step five, I now want you to go to the HSL, or what has become the black and white mixer, And because we've separated out tones, you can actually start seeing each of these sliders have its own impact over the image, right? So what I'm going to do is pull the oranges down a little. Let's pull the reds down. Let's pull the yellows down. So that's kind of covering the foliage or moss or whatever is on those rocks, okay? Now check out the blues. The blues have been separated quite dramatically from the image, and so we have a lot of control there. We don't want to go too much. So I'm going to pull it down to like maybe -16. I'm going to pull the aquas down a bit as well. Let's see if there's any purples, maybe a little bit. There's not really too much magenta. And let's see about the greens. The greens, there's a little, and I usually like to pull the greens down quite a bit on a black and white image. This is great. So now we're going to go back to presence. And step 6 is you're going to amplify everything through presence. We do this with a little bit of clarity, but mostly with dehaze. So what dehaze is going to do is amp up everything that we just did. So we're going to crank dehaze to maybe +30. And this is where I would go back to exposure and back to my base tones and just make sure I'm still good with it. So I'm going to pull the blacks down a bit more, maybe add a little bit more contrast, and we'll get to, let's say, right about here, okay? This is where we go to the last and final step, which is local adjustments. So I'm going to do a couple different things. One, I'm going to turn on profile correction just so that we kind of correct any bend in the horizon line right there. Let's go ahead and bring this horizon just kind of straight across. And I have a preset for all these things like a post-crop vignette, but what's happening is it's just going down to the effects and adding post-crop vignette. It's going down and turning on lens corrections like right here. So you can do it manually, or I'd recommend setting up, these are kind of workflow presets to make things a little bit quicker. The other thing I'm going to do is I have another workflow preset here called the radial filter. I'm actually going to bring this in. All it does, if I press Shift M, it just drops a -0.5 exposure right in the center of the image, which I can then move around to wherever I want. I'm going to move it right toward the wave that I kind of want everybody to focus in on, right? I'm going to pull this down, maybe bring it in just a bit, and watch. I'm going to let the whites shine through. So see, the whites on the outside, I kind of still want them to be brighter and more white. So I'm going to bring them up a bit. I'm even going to bring the highlight point up a bit. Let's actually shrink this. I'm going to make sure this doesn't blow out on the top right corner, but I like that. Okay, so I'm going to go right about here. Okay, so we're letting that vignette kind of control the shadows. I'm going to bring maybe the shadow point up a little bit, or the exposure. But we're letting the whites kind of shine through on it so it doesn't get too dark. Our whites don't kind of drop away. Now, if you'd like at this point, you can do a couple other things. For example, I have another local adjustment here. You guys can pause the video, save out the settings for this. This is a sky, cloud, ocean enhancing brush. And I'll drop this over the sky. And what you can do instead of painting it in is just use a graduated filter, drop it right in right there. And then I'll usually try to back this off on like the wave itself. But first, let's hold down Alt or Option and actually dial back the adjustment so it's not quite as potent. Now going to the brush setting, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and just paint and feather this edge off the wave a little. The last thing I might want to do is just add one more brush. So look, I have this Dodge whites right here, and I'm going to paint this over the whites of the image to lift the white point. So you can, again, I'm using, by the way, these are presets from Visual Flow, from the retouching toolkit that Visual Flow has. But if you don't have it, that's totally fine. Just pause the video and dial in the exact settings and you're golden, okay? We've done everything from the ground up here, so there's nothing here that you can't do. Okay, so I'm going to paint that in. And obviously, the feather is not quite perfect, right? That's okay. Let's refine it in just a second. Let's start by first holding Alt or Option. We're going to drag back to get the wave and the water to kind of a more subtle point where it jumps out, but it's not like too obvious. Then I can hold Alt or Option and then kind of feather off these outside edges over here, okay? I'm going to feather off the outside edges that are reaching into the clouds. And that's starting to look really cool. I can do the same thing, kind of feather off these edges that are close to the rocks. But because this is only affecting highlights and whites, notice how the rocks aren't even really being affected at all, right? So everything is kind of contained within the actual highlights of the image. which I really like a lot. And you can also use the range mask set to luminance to kind of further exaggerate that. So right now I'm looking at this. I'm going to press backslash to see what we have. And I'm looking at it and I feel like the water might be standing out a bit too much for me. So I'm going to dial this back just a little more, maybe to right here. And that's starting to look really nice. The last thing I'm going to do is add one more graduated filter. We're going to go from the bottom up. Okay, and we're going to do that burn just to kind of pull attention right into the center of that wave. So granted, we've done a good amount of local adjustments, but really what helped us in this entire process was separating out the color tones at the beginning. Leave the image in color, separate the color tones, use calibration to actually exaggerate those colors. Then when you flip into black and white, darken and use the HSL to expand however you'd like, because now you have full control over that black and white, the black and white mixer, not the HSL, to control all those different colors. So the end result, well, compared to, let's go back to this setup. So this was the standard black and white conversion. This was just a quick overall edit. And this is our final image. Now you might wonder, what would it look like without all the local adjustments? It would be pretty substantial still of a difference between these two images. For example, I'm going to make a virtual copy by pressing Control''. Let's go to all the local adjustments and we'll reset each one of these. Okay, I'm going to reset the graduated filters. Okay, I'll reset the radial filter. Okay, so this is just essentially where we stopped with the separating of colors, kind of using our black and white mixer and then using dehaze to punch it all up, right? Now look at this sequence. Look at how much more detail we get from our black and white with just that step compared to the quick edit, essentially, the way that we might typically edit a black and white photograph. It's a substantial difference. And then of course, with our local adjustments, we get even more pop, a really cool final image. But hopefully this gave you guys some ideas on a new way of approaching your black and white edits when it comes to Lightroom. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, I'd love for you to leave a thumbs up on the video. That helps us out a ton. You can also help us out by subscribing to Adorama TV. And if you want to be notified as each video goes up every day, we have tons of awesome videos that are going up. Be sure to hit the notifications button as well. In the meantime, love to see your comments below. I actually do read all of them, even though I don't get a chance to reply to everybody. I read them, I get ideas, see what you guys want to learn next. So drop me some hints, what you guys want to learn next. In the meantime, y'all can follow me at PyJirsa on Instagram, and I'll see you guys next episode. Peace.